Well, hello everybody. Welcome to my loyal listener. It's good to have you with us this evening on this beautiful Tuesday evening. Um, I want to just to start with an apology, really. This is, I know, a whole new experience for all of us and quite a steep learning curve. Um, and I know that last week when we tried to do some singing, I know it was really hard. It was hard for you inevitably to be doing something completely different from what we're used to, but also the technology is such that it adds yet greater difficulties and challenges to what we're trying to do. So I do understand that, and I hope you didn't feel too demoralized or put off by the difficulties we all encountered last week. Having said that, I'm not sure that I've got much of a solution this week. Oh, that's not so good. I'm not sure that I've managed to solve many of the problems, but I have hopefully improved things a little bit, and also just to keep you posted. I will be doing more over the next week or so to try and improve the software that I use at this end to try and improve the quality and make the whole experience just a little bit slicker and better. So hopefully it will improve, and I just ask you please to be patient with us and bear with us, and we'll do the very best job we can. As you know, the basic problem of this whole process is not only the fact that the sound is different from the picture because of all the delay and so forth, but also the sound is incredibly tightly restricted, compressed, so it can all fit down a very small copper tube or copper wire, which is all that's connecting me here to the internet and therefore broadcasting to you. So given that, it's amazing that anything works at all. And the Wi-Fi here where I live is not brilliant at the best of times, and it's quite inclined to fade out a bit, so that doesn't improve the quality either. But anyway, excuses out of the way. We'll try and remain as upbeat and positive as we possibly can. And I wanted just to start with a positive note, which I hope will encourage us all a little bit. Firstly, to report that last night, Monday evening, in Winchester Cathedral, just down the road from me here, in a building I know you're very familiar with, they had their first live evensong. So they had proper choristers dressed as choristers in the choir stalls, singing live in the building, doing evensong, which hasn't happened for 6 months. So that was an exciting development. They're doing it very carefully. They just had the boys on their own last night, and I think tonight they're doing another one with just the male singers, the alto tenors and basses. And then at the weekend, they're having the girls' choir who will work on their own and so on. So they're not mixing it up too much. They're keeping some separate bubbles. But nevertheless, it's really encouraging that even though it's obviously a very big building, that they were allowed to go ahead and do some live singing. So that was great. I was really excited to hear that. The other thing I wanted to share with you on a positive note was the fact that I had a very long conversation. In fact, we did a Q&A session on Zoom on Saturday for my Basingstoke choir with Erica Eloff. You know Erica very well. She's one of our presidents and so forth, and an amazing singer. But what you may not know is that Erica has moved, both herself and her 3 children, to Austria, to Linz in Austria, where she is currently under contract for at least 2 years as their principal soprano at the Opera House in Linz, which is really exciting for her, and a magnificent step up in her career, which is really exciting. But not only that, but she told me that they are pretty much working as normal in Austria. So the orchestra were playing, the orchestra are rehearsing, the chorus are rehearsing, the soloists are all rehearsing and going on stage and so forth. Obviously, the various safety procedures are in place, but in terms of the actual performing, they're pretty much working as normal. And even more exciting, they are due to open their first night of Fidelio is this coming Saturday. And of course, Erica will be starring as Leonora in Fidelio, and it's open to a live audience. So I think it's restricted to 50 or 60% of the house, but it's sold out. All the tickets that were put on sale have been sold. So the audience is prepared to come out to watch the opera, which is fantastic, and to listen to the opera. That's wonderful. And of course, it has serious financial aspects. But if anybody can sort it, I think Austria possibly can, because they tend to have very generous subsidies of their opera houses. So if they can do it, then it just shows that there is hope for others in other parts of Europe. So that was very encouraging and really exciting news. And the other company that I work for, Grange Park Opera, they actually put on a performance of a specially commissioned and recently written opera at the weekend. I think it was on Saturday night, which they'd rehearsed and put together. It was just with piano accompaniment, but it nevertheless involved a number of professional singers working together on stage. And they performed it for an invited, socially distanced audience. And apparently I wasn't there myself, but it was very successful, and people got very excited about that. And just as a side issue, one of the things that was quite interesting about it, Wasfi Khan, who is the guiding light of Grange Park Opera, she came up with this crazy idea of, rather than having a group of audience and then loads of empty seats and then another couple of audience and so on, which gives a rather poor impression of the house when you look out on it, she had this fabulous idea of encouraging all the audience members to bring teddy bears or large stuffed toy animals of any description to put on the empty seats. Thinking that all these sort of top civil servants and masters of industry and all the sort of people who are very enthusiastic opera goers, she had no idea whether people would actually adopt this practice and go with it, but they did. And all these people arrived clutching these bears and teddies and what have you, and put them out on the seats. And when I saw the picture of it, it looked fantastic, because it looked as if the whole auditorium was full with kind of smiling faces, even though not all of them were real people. But I thought it was a brilliant idea, and one which I'm sure will be copied elsewhere, and also just gave a really light, happy atmosphere to the event, which for goodness sake we all need at the moment, don't we? So I thought I'd share that idea with you, and also the good news from Erica and from Winchester Cathedral. So I know things are tricky at the moment and it looks really dire and all the rest of it, but hopefully there is light at the end of the tunnel, and we will be performing in some sort of way, or at least meeting to rehearse together at some point in the not too distant future. I sincerely hope so. So last week, as you know, was really meant to be an introduction to the B minor Mass of Bach, and that's why I spent some time talking about the piece and my feelings about it and my reaction to it and so on, which I hope it didn't bore you all too rigid, but at least it gave, I hope, a little bit of an insight into the piece as I see it. We then did a little bit of singing at the end, but it was never my intention to do a huge amount of singing last week. And as I said at the beginning, I do understand that it was quite tricky for for you all just to hear the quality of the sound wasn't good, and just keeping up and trying to sing along was really, really difficult. And of course, it goes against everything that we normally do. We spend years of our lives singing together, blending, listening to each other, working with each other, and standing next to people, like-minded people, not just other singers, but people singing our own part. And one of the great problems that we have with this kind of situation is the fact that we are suddenly all soloists. We are left completely on our own, having to cope as a soloist would, which is not what we've signed up to do. And I fully understand that, and I'm not surprised that we all find this difficult. But I thought I'd start with just a few general tips about getting back to singing and trying to get the voice into a reasonable state. Because if you're anything like me, you probably haven't sung very much for the last 6 months. And that can have quite a devastating effect on the voice, on the resilience of the voice and the stamina that we have and so forth. And this is particularly relevant to me today. I've been teaching in primary schools all day, live. So I've been going into primary schools, various schools around the Winchester area, and setting up my piano and doing live singing with groups of children, primary school children, mostly year 4 and 5, that sort of age, in large spaces. So we've been very lucky to be able to use the halls of these schools. So there's been lots of space, lots of distancing, but nevertheless, everybody live in the room. And it's been great. It's been really, really fun to be able to do that today. But the only downside is it means I've been literally singing in these quite big spaces for a full 5 hours today. I've done 5 hours of singing almost continuously with just a break for lunch. And so it's no surprise to me that the old voce is not what it should be and is a little bit croaky tonight. And I thought, well, I don't want that to happen to my loyal listeners. So I thought we'd start off with just a few tips. Now, rather than try and do examples of exercises together, as we know, it's very hard to sing together. So I just thought I'll give you some ideas, things to try at home, and then you can do them in your own time, both now and at other points in your own time, if you're so moved to do that. The first thing, of course, is to get the breathing going and to make sure that we're breathing in the right direction. So many people, so many adults tend to breathe in the wrong direction, by which I mean kind of upside down, where instead of getting bigger when we breathe in, they tend to get smaller and the shoulders go up and all of that sort of stuff. But it's all very basic, and I've talked about it millions of times, I know, and you're probably sick to death of hearing it, but it's just good just to have that refresher in the mind to make sure that when we breathe as low as we possibly can, encouraging the muscles of the lower abdomen to expand in all directions. And if they're doing that when we take the breath in, there's a really good chance that when we sing and the muscles contract slightly, that helps the process of keeping the sound, as we call it, supported. We're supporting the diaphragm. It's very hard to control the diaphragm itself. It's a kind of one of those automatic muscles that we don't have a lot of control over, but we can control the outer muscles of the abdomen, the lower abdomen. And the more we can do that, the more it'll help create that feeling of a platform, a really strong platform upon which the air column, which is nice and straight and vertical, can provide the most ideal stream of supported air at a sufficient pressure to make the larynx vibrate in the best possible way. So it's just really important that we consider our deportment, the way we stand, making use of the muscles, and just practice from time to time, just doing that breathing process. So if we take one big breath and then we just make a very simple sound, it could just be a hum, And whilst you're humming, just feel the muscles contracting ever so slightly, and that feeling of compressing the muscles in the lower abdomen will help that sensation of the airflow coming this way. Imagine a big fountain with the water pressure going vertically up. In this case, it's air pressure. And imagine there was I don't know, a ping pong ball or something on the top of the fountain or on top of the air column. So you were providing enough pressure to maintain the position of the ping pong ball on the top without it dropping. And so all the time that we're singing a sustained sound, it's really important that that column of air is working really efficiently. And it's hard. Professional singers struggle for years to get their breathing right, and that they tend to go 2 steps forward and 1 step back and all the rest of it. It's really a difficult thing to master, but we can all work at it and we can all get better at it. So breathing's the first thing. The second thing is what we do to release the tension. As you know, the one thing that really makes life difficult for a singer is tension, particularly around the upper part of the mouth and the tongue, and above all in the larynx itself. So whatever we do, we have to try and relax everything from the shoulders up as much as possible. We need lots of tension low. We need that strong column of air. And then from here upwards, everything needs to be as relaxed as it can possibly be. And one of the things that really helps that is controlling what we do with our tongue. The tongue is such an important element of singing when it comes to diction, words, and consonants in particular. But for singing a vowel, it's very much less important. And in fact, it's really good if we can get rid of the tongue as much, or get it out of the way as much as possible. Couple of tips that we often use. Firstly is to try and put the tip of the tongue behind the bottom teeth so that it's really low in the mouth, and then try and flatten it out as much as possible. So rather than the tongue doing that, try and keep it as flat as we can. So we have these are the bottom teeth. This is the tip of the tongue, and trying to keep it low, keep it flat. And obviously people have different size tongues. Some are comparatively small and they fit very neatly on the bottom of the mouth. Others have longer tongues, and you may find you have to kind of fold it up a bit to keep it flat. Otherwise, it will immediately do that. So just try experimenting with your tongue. See where you can put the tip of the tongue, seeing how flat you can make the rest of the tongue, and then just make a very simple sound, sort of or whatever. Just I'm very croaky, as you can hear, but any kind of sound that just comes naturally, a nondescript vowel. So not an R or an E or an E, just a nondescript vowel, just passing the air across the larynx, keeping the tongue out of the way, and just seeing how long you can sustain it for. So in your own time, just have a go at that. I won't say start now because it's pointless. So just use a little bit of a few seconds now to have a go on your own. Good. I'm sure loyal listeners, you're all doing that, but I can't tell because obviously I can't hear you and I can't see you, but I can see the number of you that there are out there. So that's great. Now, another tip which may help. Some people find that if you take a very, very clean pencil, one that's been heavily disinfected, or whatever it needs to happen to it, to place that underneath the tongue. So you're actually sticking your tongue out over the top and then holding the pencil. What the effect that has, of course, is to put the tongue further forward, even further forward than what we were doing just now. And the effect of that is to create more space at the back. So here again is our bottom teeth. Here's the tongue. So if we've got it that over the top, and we've still got it flat, then what have happened then is that the space at the back of the mouth, at the back of the throat, is going to be much greater, more space. And the more we can maximize that space, the better, for two reasons. One is it creates less tension in the larynx. So in other words, the muscles are more relaxed and much freer to vibrate naturally rather than being tightly controlled. Yeah. And the second thing it does, if we create more space at the back of the throat, the effect of that is to create extra resonance. And as you know, we all need resonance. The voice itself, the larynx, the vocal folds, the vocal cords, make a comparatively modest amount of sound. They vibrate together. That vibration creates the actual sound. And that sound is what we associate with singing or speaking or any other kind of vocal sound. But what we require to maximize the quality and the amount of sound that we produce is to have a resonating chamber. Just in the same way, if you're familiar with a guitar or a ukulele, there's probably one in this room somewhere, but not out of its case. So I won't try and do one for now. But if you think about a guitar, you've got strings which are stretched in a certain tension, and when you pluck them, they vibrate, and the vibration causes a knocking effect in the air, and that produces the sound. But it's comparatively quiet. If you ever come across an electric guitar which isn't plugged into anything, and you can hit it quite hard, you hit the strings quite hard, it makes very, very little sound, because of course without the amplification, it's almost not an instrument at all. So an acoustic guitar is very dependent on the resonance that comes from that wonderfully shaped wooden box. Same with a violin or any other string instrument. It's the resonating chamber that makes the difference. That's why people pay so much money for a really high quality violin or cello. It's not for the strings, it's for the box, the simple wooden box, because how that box takes the sound of the string and amplifies it and makes it better in terms of quality and quantity, it's that makes the instrument special. And it's the same for us as singers. Obviously, the quality of the sound source is important, but a lot of it is to do with the amount of resonance that we can add to that sound. And the resonance comes from the chest, comes from the back of the throat, and it also comes from the head. So everything around here needs to be free and open and relaxed to vibrate as much as possible. And it's that combination of the wonderful air column, the vibrations from the vocal folds, and the resonance that comes from the space in our bodies that produces the sound that we need to hear, that we want to hear. It's one of the reasons, of course, why there was a theory at one point that you had to be physically quite large to get the very best out of the voice, the sort of Pavarotti syndrome of being quite a substantial unit in order to make the best quality sound. Nowadays, people aren't quite so clear about that, and I think it's more common for people to recognize that it's what we do with the resonating space, it's how we use it that matters, rather than the sheer size of the resonating space. That's the current theory anyway. So breathing, we've talked about position of the tongue, we've talked about the resonance that we need. Just a couple of other things. If you want a little quick exercise just to get the voice going, one I tend to use is a goo. So just think G-O-O. So go, 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 go. The good thing about this is, because of the G at the beginning, go, go, you get a kind of build-up of the pressure, of the air pressure. Go. So that allows the air to build up after taking the breath. And then when we release the breath, onto the G sound, that provides the very best start for the larynx to work. Goo, and then the oo sound itself can be very relaxed and very easy. So again, rather than trying to do that with me and worry about timing and all that sort of thing, just have a go at doing that simple exercise, just 5 goos. Goo, 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 goo. Do it as slow as you like in your own time. Just have a go. And here I can imagine the people who share your house thinking, what on earth are they doing? What on earth is going on in there? But never mind. We carry on. Okay. One other thing, which I think is important, is that we should literally practice our humming. Humming is really good for a number of reasons for the voice. One is it takes the minimum amount of stress and strain on the larynx, on the chords themselves, and indeed on the lips and the teeth and everything else. Because we're not doing consonants and we're not doing words, humming is perhaps the most relaxed and most relaxing type of vocalizing we can do. So all of that is good for preserving and maintaining the quality of the voice and keeping it going as long as possible. The other thing, which as you probably heard, is that when we are able to sing live in the same room, the chances of being able to sing big, splashy fortissimos are not great, because the scientists have decided that that's when you get the most amount of aerosol, when you're really going for it. So discouraging very loud singing and yelling and shouting and all those sort of things. Those are the things that are discouraged because of the aerosol issue. And therefore, to spend some of the time that we will hopefully get to rehearse, actually humming will be good from every perspective. So it's a good thing to get used to the idea of humming. And I just want to share with you, again, what I often say about humming is that it's not this very tense where everything squeezes up and we go. That's more reflective of other types of activity, but not singing, certainly not humming. Instead, what I like to think of is it's an open R vowel. So we open up everything as wide as we can, make all the space we can possibly make, particularly at the back of the throat. So again, tongue forward, lots of space at the back, keeping the tongue down. You may think of something like having a hot potato on the back of the tongue, any kind of trick that will enable you to keep that tongue down. So think of that as an open R, and then just simply close the shutters in the front. So we take the R, and closing the shutters. And all that will happen is the sound will get slightly muffled, but you'll feel a huge amount of resonance and vibrating going on in the front of the mouth. If you do it too much and too loud, it can actually get quite unpleasant after a while. But for a short time, it's absolutely fine. And it also encourages us not to overuse the breath, and that will help us to maintain longer phrases. Something that I know all singers, and me included, really struggle with is the idea of starting here and having to maintain a long vocal line and stopping here when we find we actually start to run out of breath about 2/3 of the way through. So getting used to this idea of humming gently, where there's not too much sensation of the rapid vibrations going on in the front of the mouth, is really beneficial for helping sustain longer lines. So in your own time, again, just have a little practice. Open the mouth, open the space, take a big breath, start with an R, and then just close the shutters and also throttle back a bit in terms of dynamic, and see how that feels. Just have a go on your own. Good. I have to say, whenever I stop talking and I look at the screen in front of me and it shows a picture of the utter chaos behind me, it's really quite embarrassing. I can only apologize for that. My only defense is that some politicians have almost as much chaos behind them when they're talking on the TV as I've got. Anyway, I will endeavor to do something about that. Okay, so we talked a little about breathing, we talked about increasing the resonance, and we talked about humming as a really good preparation. Now, in terms of singing Bach, as you know, and as I mentioned last week, Bach doesn't take any prisoners, as we know. He tends to assume that anything a violin can do or an oboe can do, then a singer can do as well. So he does treat us singers as if we were instrumentalists, which is very flattering in some ways, but also slightly problematic. So we have got to get used to the idea that we can move the voice really quite rapidly. So here's another little exercise that you can do, just simply to get the voice moving. So if we were doing that, just very simple, just little slow trills, but just moving the voice up and down. So when we've got the very rapid semi-quaver runs that you get a lot of in Bach, we can start to prepare the voice now for when we get these really demanding runs to do later on. And by the time we get, hopefully, to the concert, the performance of this piece, the voice will be in really good shape to be able to get round these rapid semi-quaver runs, semi-quaver patterns. So anything that you can do, as well as the gentle humming, the breathing exercise, anything you can do just to practice. Just take a single trill, if you like, and just start slowly and very gradually speed up. Again, we won't try and do it now together because of the issues that we've talked about, but perhaps in your own time, you could just try that as an idea, try that as an exercise, just to get the voice working. And if you do it quite low down to begin with, then go up a bit, and then go up again. And the higher you go, the more you will tend to feel the larynx wanting to jump up and down. And as soon as you feel that, you've got to be able to think, okay, let's stop and try that again, and keeping everything much more relaxed. And if it's going too much, and you can feel it going backwards and tightening and getting more and more tense, then come back down. And go up in very small steps, trying to maintain that comfort, maintain that relaxed feeling. And as soon as it starts to get non-relaxed, it starts to get too tight, then come back down in terms of pitch, come back down in terms of dynamic, and try again and build up really gradually, really slowly, and don't try and push the voice too far. So it's really important that you don't get into the habit of straining and pushing and shoving to get the higher notes. We all do it. Even the best singers have been known to. But the important thing is to try and work at the lower and mid range of the voice and get it working as relaxed as you possibly can. And then gradually shifting that same technique a little bit higher by easy, gentle steps until such time as the slightly higher notes become a little bit easier and less effortful, if you see what I mean. As I think I mentioned last week, or maybe I didn't, we will be performing and indeed rehearsing this piece at Baroque pitch, which is A415, and that is pretty much a semitone lower than written. So everything you see on the page, even if it looks like a really high note, there's always that comforting feeling, it's not as high as it looks. It's actually a semitone lower. So that's how we will be rehearsing as well as performing. That makes life a little bit easier. And one of the things actually that has often occurred to me, that as singers, when we have the score in front of us and we're watching our part and we see suddenly a high note written in the score where it goes, especially if it goes above the stave, so kind of psychologically, we immediately tense up. We think, oh my goodness, there's a high note coming. What am I going to do? I know, push harder, tense these muscles, try and really work the voice so we get up to that high note. And of course, it's a perfectly natural psychological approach, but it's not the best thing to do, as we know. If anything, it's better when we're singing something without a score, in other words, from memory or just using our ear, and then we're not really aware of where the high notes are. We're certainly not seeing them, and it's seeing which tends to look rather frightening. So if we can try not to allow the contents of the score, the written score, to make us panic about, oh, this is a particularly high note or whatever, but instead try and keep as naturally relaxed as we possibly can. And let's face it, if the note comes out beautifully, great. If it doesn't matter. It's not to worry, would be my suggestion. Okay, the time has come. I've rattled on quite long enough, and I hope I haven't bored you too much. But one of the things I would like to see is, or like to try, is just having a very gentle go at this Dona Nobis Pacem. So this is the final movement of the B minor Mass. I'm not going to go on too long because I'm so aware of the imperfections of this, but at least we can do one or two bits very slowly, very gently, and hopefully with the equipment that I've got at the moment, it won't sound too bad. Fingers crossed. So this is the Dona Nobis Pacem, and I want to start with the tenors and the sopranos working together. And that may sound a bit odd, but when you look at the first tenor phrase, which starts at the end of the first bar, and then you look at the first soprano phrase, which starts at the beginning or in the middle of bar 3. And lo and behold, of course, it's exactly the same. It's written an octave higher and it's written 2 bars later. But in all other respects, it's exactly the same. So we can put the two parts together just to save a bit of time. Okay, so even though we're starting in different places, for the purposes of this exercise, I want you to sing together. You won't be able to hear each other, but you can imagine. Okay, so when we're ready, we take the breath and. The only difference, as some sharp-eyed people will notice, is that the soprano last note is an A minim, and the tenor last note is an A semibreve. So technically, that's the only difference between the two phrases, the tenor part and the soprano part. It's the length of the final note. So we won't worry too much about that. But one thing I would like to point out is you notice there's a comma. So between the two pacems, there's a comma. Now, this has a double whammy. First of all, it's an opportunity to breathe, but also it's part of the phrasing of that initial statement. What we need to do is to phrase away. So pacem, and again. So the pa is more important than the chem on both occasions. Pacem, pacem. That gives the phrase musicality, gives it shape, gives it a new dimension, which if we just did it without that, it wouldn't have. So creating that shape, using the text, using the phrasing, using the commas in the text can have a real uplifting effect on the whole texture. Let's do that one more time and then we'll move on to the altos and basses. So take the breath, ready and go. Good. Let's move on to the bass and alto sections. Now here, needless to say, we've got the same idea. The bass line, and indeed the alto line. So this time we've got exactly the same melodic phrase as the tenors and sopranos had. Everything is identical apart from the fact that it's set a fifth lower. Or if you like, the sopranos and altos are set a fifth higher because, of course, this happens first. Being in D major, we start on the D with the basses. Yeah. So because they're identical, the two parts, the bass part and the alto part, again, to save time, we can put them together and have you both singing at the same time in octaves. So the basses are going to start in bar 1 and the altos are going to start in bar 2, but starting together. So we put everything underneath each other. Here we go. Line them up. We take the breath and go. Should we do that one more time? Here we go. And ready. Good. Now this time what I'd like you to do is I'd like everybody to sing, but in the same way. So the basses and altos are going to sing together, starting in that first bar. So imagine altos that you're starting a whole bar earlier. And the same time, or not the same time, but 2 beats later, the tenors and the sopranos are going to start, but working together. So it'll sound like something like this. Do you see what I mean? So all the basses and all the altos starting at the beginning, working together, all the tenors, all the sopranos starting 2 beats later, starting on the A. Let's just try that. So we'll just put that together, everybody singing in that way, starting now. So I hope you understood what I meant by that, and I hope it worked for you. It's hard to tell from here, but I'm trusting that it did. Okay, so this time we're just going to go the full hog and sing exactly the same thing, but as it's written. So this time the basses are going to start on their own, the tenors are going to come in where it's written on their own, and then the altos are going to imitate the basses, the end of the second bar, and so on. Sopranos come in last. So exactly as it's written in the score. Starting with the bass lead. 3, 4, 1. And we all finish with the soprano parchem at the end of bar 5 going into bar 6. So this is exactly what's written in the order that it's written, but because we've rehearsed it together and separately, hopefully it'll make more sense and be slightly easier for you singing on your own. Because as I said at the beginning, we fully understand, or I do at any rate, that this is a completely different experience from what you're used to. You're not used to having to sing entirely on your own without other colleagues working with you, being alongside you, and so forth. So nice, easy steps. Let's do that one more time. And this time I want you to concentrate, as well as the actual notes and the words, but on two things. One is the dynamic, which I want it to be really quiet. So it's not da na, but da na no. Really gentle singing, soft singing, but fully supported, hopefully not croaking like I am, and above all, very, very legato. So we really concentrate on the legato. One of the things which always becomes very clear when you hear and even a very good amateur choir like yourselves and a professional ensemble is the difference in the sustained element of the legato. In other words, what we tend to get, do, na, no, which has a kind of accent at the beginning of each note and doesn't have the full duration of the sound. Whereas a really good professional ensemble will sustain every single note for as long as you possibly can. So in real terms, the end of each minim is probably louder than the beginning. It's the opposite of a piano. Piano, obviously, the beginning of each note is by far the strongest, because that's when the hammer hits the string, or imitates in terms of this electronic piano, but that's the concept of a piano. And so the notes all decay. Singing is like doing that backwards. You actually start quite gently at the beginning of the note and then sustain it in such a way that it grows. And that's what really makes this music come alive, is that feeling of legato sustaining. So piano and very, very legato, still remembering to do that phrasing. Pardon, pardon. So we sing the chems significantly quieter than the pas. Okay, let's try that again. So we take the breath, ready, and one. Good. Okay, well, let's go on for a little bit. We may not cover the whole piece tonight, the whole movement, but that's fine. We just want to get as much as we can in the shortest possible time, really. So we're going to go on with the basses, because you have the next phrase, and this phrase starting in bar 5 is where we first get a string of quavers in this case. So where we've got to really move the voice up and down. And that phrase in bar 5 basses sounds like this. And of course here, there are no commas. So this time it's not pacem, do, because the text phrase goes from pacem to dona nobis. Peace, give us, in other words. Pacem do. So to join it together, to join the pacem to the do, we make use of the M. This will apply to all the voices. Make use of that M on the end of pacem. Pacem do. See what I mean? So it links it together, makes the text very clear, because you can hear the pacem, but at the same time, it maintains the line, maintains that legato phrase. So let's just try that one more time, basses. 3, 4, 1. Now, I'm going going to switch from the basses to the altos because your next phrase, starting in bar 6, is quite similar to the basses, but not exactly the same. So which is why we can't do them together on this occasion. So it is imitative, it is similar, but has a slight difference. And it sounds like this, starting in bar 6, altos. Sorry, just fell off that F sharp. Yeah, you notice it's not very different. The bassist would, and you have. It's only the last 2 notes that are different, but it's enough to make a major difference to the harmony of that passage. So altos, let's just try that. See if we can sing with the piano. 2 and 3, go. Good. Now we're going to move on to the tenors. Now the tenors at the end of bar 5 have a very similar phrase to the bass and alto one, as you would expect, as it's Bach. But you notice it doesn't sound quite as sweet as the bass and the alto line. He's had to change some of the intervals to make it fit into the harmony. The basses have. Whereas the tenor version doesn't have quite the flow. And it's no reflection on the fact that you're tenors. It's nothing personal, gentlemen. It's just a position where you happen to come in order to make it fit the harmonies without going off into a tangent, modulating into really different keys where the composer doesn't want to go. He has to slightly modify it. And that's why you get these C sharps in bar 7. And then this rather random ending. Sounds almost like random notes. So it's just unfortunate that this happens a lot in Bach. You think you're going to get the same melodic line as one you've just heard because it's so imitative, but there's always a little sting in the tail, slight alteration. He puts something slightly different, and that's the reason why, is to make it fit the harmony, the overriding harmony. Because remember that the imitation is happening a fourth apart. That's why it makes it really tricky to sight read this music. Okay, tenors, let's try that on your own with the piano. 2 and 3, go. Hope that makes sense. And finally, sopranos, sorry to keep you waiting for so long. Your phrase starting in bar 7 sounds like this. And you notice that's very similar to the tenor part, but for the addition of the C natural. The tenors have with C sharps, you have, which is much more natural and much more what you would expect to happen, because he's bringing the key back to the tonic D major. That's why you're able to. It's that harmonic progression which allows the C natural. So let's just try that, sopranos, on your own. Ready? This is bar 7, Pacem Dona Nobis. And 1. Good. Now, before we go on, what I'd like to do is to have two pairs of voices working together. So we're going to put the basses starting in bar 5 and the tenors at the end of bar 5. So have you working together, your little duet, and then we'll do the same with the soprano and alto part. So basses and tenors first, please. Bar 5 and 1. Tenors. Immediately sounds much more complex and much trickier, doesn't it? That's the thing about this music, because of its very contrapuntal nature. As soon as you put the parts together, even two parts, it suddenly becomes really complex. But the good news is that the individual lines themselves, apart from some of these alterations, these harmonic alterations I've just been talking about, the individual lines themselves, certainly in this movement, are comparatively straightforward. At least I hope you agree with that. Let's do that one more time. Basses and tenors, please. There's the bass A. There's the D for the tenors. So 1. Good. Now we'll move on to the alto and soprano duet. So this is starting in bar 6, end of bar 6. The altos begin on the A and the sopranos come in the next bar on the D. So altos first, 2, 3. Let's just do that one more time. Ready, 2, 3. Remember, long sustained notes. Good. Let's be really bold and see if we can put all that together. So starting in bar 5 with the bass lead, Pacem, tenors come in 2 beats later, and the altos come in the next bar, and so on. Here we go. Bar 5, Pacem, basses, and 1. Good. Okay, well, let's see if we can do that just as far as there, no further for the moment, and we'll join the Monteverdi choir. So at least we've got a bit of vocal support, which will hopefully make life easier for us. I'm just checking that everything's ready to go here. Okay, so this is Dona Nobis Pacem from the beginning, the Monteverdi choir conducted by John Elliott Gardner with your good selves. Here we go. I wonder how that worked. I know, again, that the sound quality isn't great. I'm using the best speaker that I've got in the house here, and I'm using a professional mic. So I hope it works reasonably well. But I do understand, because of all the compression that's going on, that the chances are the sound is pretty poor quality. And I apologize for that. We are trying to do something about it, and hopefully next week you'll notice an improvement on the sound quality, which will make this whole process a little bit more enjoyable. So I don't want to do this too much, and I don't want to go on too long. I think we've made the point. I've given you lots of tips, lots of ideas for how we can get the voice going, how to begin our process of learning this music and trying to get into grips with these really quite difficult notes. Somebody's just sent me a very kind message on the live chat saying the sound seems fine, which is excellent news indeed. Thank you for that. I can't tell you how happy that makes me feel, because I was really worried about it. Okay, let's do it one more time then. If the sound isn't too bad, let's see if we can do exactly that. So from the beginning as far as there, and then we'll maybe go on to one more phrase and then put it all together and see how we are. So here it is from the beginning. He says, good. Okay. Now, let's just do one more phrase. This is a good example of how these melodic lines that start so in such a straightforward way, nice and contained. That opening statement, remember, is only 4 notes, 4 different notes, so all quite contained within a small range, and it just moves up gradually, has a nice shape to it. Everything you could wish for in a very simple musical motive or musical theme. But when we go to the bass lead in bar 5, you can, sorry, bar 8, you can see that here the composer's taken the same idea but extended it, developed it. And part of that development is to make it a little bit more angular. The range is bigger, it goes higher and it goes lower as well, but also it becomes more angular, so that the movement up and down, instead of just being scales, now we have start with the scale and then jumping. So we not only have this much more angular melodic phrase, but we've also introduced a more complex rhythm. In this case, that kind of syncopation. Listen again. Nice and straightforward here, and then let's just do that basis, and then we'll move on to the next parts. Here we go. Bass lead, end of bar 8, and go. We need just to phrase away the end. Okay, tenors. Similar for you, but in many ways even more angular. It sounds like this. This is bar 9. Now, this is such a good example about what I was talking about, the idea of using voices as if they were instruments. Of all the notes to have at the end of a phrase, because notice it's followed by a comma, the poor tenors have to sing. This is where you're relieved that we're doing it at baroque pitch, so that high A actually becomes an A flat in real terms. Let's just sing that together, tenors, please. 3, 4, 1. quite tricky for so early on in this movement. Good. Moving on. Altos. This is bar 10. Again, you have a similar idea, starting with this nice scale, then it gets more angular. Pretty much the same as the basses. Here we go. Altos, bar 10. 3, 4, 1. So the same angular construction, same syncopation, everything else is the same. Now for the sopranos, starting at the end of bar 10, your phrase. And I played that completely wrong. Sorry about that. I was just getting excited about the quaver because, of course, the difference between your version and the tenors is similar notes, but the end is slightly modified. And also you have the addition of those two little quavers just to make life a little bit more interesting. I'll play that again properly this time. Sorry. So whereas the tenors went up to the A, they go all the way up to the A for the sopranos. You have the quavers up to the G. Again, harmonic modification or tonal modification, that's known as, where you change an imitative phrase to allow it to fit into the key structure so that you don't go off into some kind of tangent key in a direction that the composer doesn't want to go. Let's just sing that for real this time, sopranos. This is starting at the end of bar 10. 2 and. Okay, let's try putting all that together from the end of bar 8. So with the piano once, starting in the basses, the Dona Nobis Pacem, and then the tenors coming in the next bar, and altos and sopranos and so on, as written, starting in bar 8. And then we'll have a final go, joining the Monteverdi choir. Here it is, basses, bar 8. Take a breath, 2, 3. Tenors. Alto, soprano. So that's as far as we've got. I know it's slow, probably feeling painfully slow for you. You're used to going much quicker than this, but given the circumstances, given the problems of working in this way with this technology, I think it's probably safer to go too slow rather than to go too quickly and leave you behind, as it were. So let's pull all of that together. We're just going to go as far as letter A or bar 14, and then I'll have a quick chat and then it will be done. Here it is from the beginning, therefore, the beginning of this movement as written, joining the Monteverdi choir. Sorry, let's start again.
I know I went on a little bit. It's really hard to cut Bach off, don't you find? Once he starts with these wonderfully expansive, developing phrases with all the imitation, it's really hard to cut it off. But just to finish tonight, I just wanted to say I hope this has been a little bit more successful than the singing we did last week. Do let us know. We won't be sensitive. We won't be insulted by anything you say. So feel free to give us full feedback, especially me, because the more feedback I get, the easier it is to try and make things better. And hopefully it at least has been a useful way of working under these strange conditions and at least achieving what we can achieve with a small passage like this. It's painfully slow, I know, and we've only covered a few bars in the entire evening, but I hope it's nevertheless been useful, and I look forward to having another go with you next week with hopefully enhanced sound system. So all the best to you. Thank you for attending, my loyal listeners, and I shall look forward to seeing you next week. All the best. Bye for now. I'm going to water the garden in the dark. Bye for now.